Tonight we're investigating the killing of a young woman.
The killing that shocked the nation.
Let the public fix him!
It was the crime that changed a country.
The peaceful town of Prospect, New South Wales was rocked to its core. The scars from this horrifying event may never fade away. Today we're diving into the chilling tale that sent shockwaves through the community. Sunday morning, February 2nd, 1986. A day that started like any other for Anita. She got a call from her husband as she was getting ready for work. He offered to pick her up after her nursing shift, but she had other plans with friends and intended to spend the night at her parents' house. Little did they know that this casual chat would be the last time they ever exchanged words. Later that evening, Anita and her two friends, Lynn and Elaine, hit up the Red Fern restaurant for a night of laughs and good times. The clock struck 8:30 p.m., and Elaine, who lived in Crow's Nest, suggested Anita crash at her place for the night. But Anita had different ideas, wanting to catch up on some sleep before her next day's afternoon shift. Lynn played chauffeur, dropping Anita off at Central Railway Station to catch a train to Blacktown. As Anita arrived at Blacktown Railway Station, the night was late, the payphones were out of order, and there was no taxi in sight. Facing a 30-minute walk home, normally a no-brainer, she decided to take the familiar path through town. What we understand so far is that Anita chose to walk the 2 kilometers home but sadly never arrived. The following morning, her parents noticed she hadn't returned, initially thinking she might have crashed at a friend's place after a night out. It wasn't until her workplace called, worried about her absence, that the real concern set in. Anita's folks rushed to the police to report her missing. At home, they reached out to everyone who knew Anita, hoping for any leads. Later that night, in a bid to unravel the mystery, they contacted John Cobby, Anita's husband. He hurried over to Anita's parents' house, frantically making calls and inquiries to find any trace of her. The very next day, a disturbing call reached the police from a local farmer. Racing to Reen Farm, they confronted a gruesome scene. The farmer explained that he had noticed his cows acting oddly that morning, huddled together. Initially dismissing it, he couldn't ignore the strange behavior later on. Investigating, he stumbled upon a naked, bloodied body, face down, a sight that shook him to the core.
I just couldn't believe it was a human there laying in the paddock. I thought it was, a doll or something at first.
During the inquiry, the farmer mentioned hearing a scream late at night, but he thought it was just some rowdy teenagers. Little did he know, it was the chilling cry of a woman enduring a brutal assault. Despite their efforts, the police couldn't find any identification except for a unique Russian interlocking ring on her finger, offering a glimmer of hope for her identity. As they turned the body over, they were met with wide-open eyes, reflecting unspeakable horror and pain. Returning to the station, they combed through missing persons reports and stumbled upon Anita Cobby's case. Comparing a photo provided by Anita's father, Gary, with the lifeless body, they were almost certain it was her. Seeking confirmation, they urgently called Anita's parents to the station. The police showed the unique ring and asked if it was Anita's. Gary, filled with sadness, looked at the body and accepted the painful truth. When they asked John to identify her, he couldn't handle the idea of seeing Anita like that. Grace, Anita's mom, who happened to also be a nurse, offered to go, but the police worried about how tough it could be for her, as a woman and as a mother. Confronted with the heart-wrenching reality, Gary went to the morgue. Facing Anita's lifeless body, he said, "I wish I could deny that's my daughter, but then it would be someone else's child going through what I'm experiencing." At that moment, he felt the heavy burden of the terrible things Anita went through, and it shattered him completely. The police put together a team to figure out what happened to Anita. They started by checking the people close to her, and the first person they questioned was John Cobby, her husband. They thought he might be involved because they got an anonymous tip suggesting he was still really into Anita. Another tip accused John of saying bad things about her. The couple was married for 4 years, but they separated 6 weeks before she was killed. Just a week before her murder, they decided to get back together, which is why Anita was still wearing her wedding ring on the day she died. During the questioning, the police asked John about their marriage, why they separated, and what he was up to on the night of the incident. John said he was alone at home, came back from work, stayed in, and went to work the next morning. But the police didn't believe him. They were suspicious, a common thing in cases where a spouse is suspected. They couldn't confirm if he was really home alone. Thinking that John was jealous and couldn't get over Anita, the police pushed him hard to admit he did something. According to John, they even got rough, pushing him around and blaming him for Anita's death. What the police didn't know was that John and Anita were back together, planning to live together. John loved Anita a lot and felt super guilty, blaming himself for what happened. In the middle of all this guilt, tough questions, and being pushed around, John, overwhelmed and confused, ended up admitting to the murder. What the police didn't realize was that if John had insisted on picking Anita up or offered to take her home after her dinner with friends, maybe none of this terrible stuff would have happened, and Anita would still be here. That's why he confessed something that initially shook everyone. The investigators then realized something. Even though John confessed, something didn't feel right, and they weren't satisfied. They went back to the autopsy report, and it hit them that Anita's injuries were too different from each other. It was obvious that more than one person was involved in this horrible act. The wounds, the weapons used, and the level of brutality couldn't have been done by just one person in a short time. They crossed John off the suspect list, but unfortunately, they had no one else to investigate. So they kept searching, digging, trying to figure out who did it and why. No leads came up. They looked into local SA offenders near the train station and Anita's route home, but they didn't find a match. The media caught wind of the case and the police wanted it everywhere, hoping for leads. Then a well-known morning radio DJ, John Laws, got his hands on Anita's autopsy report. He debated for hours whether to share it on air, but he decided the public had a right to know. Before this, neither the public nor Anita's parents knew the details of what Anita went through, but now the whole of Australia did. Once the public heard the autopsy report, there was outrage. Anita's parents were upset, but in the end they were thankful because they believed the public needed to be aware. The leaked autopsy report quickly became a national sensation. The report from the doctor who examined Anita's body talked about how badly she was hurt. She had bruises all over on her head, breasts, face, shoulders, groin, thighs, and legs. The doctor said it looked like she was beaten in a planned way. Her breasts were particularly damaged, like someone deliberately went after them. There were cuts on her hips, thighs, and legs from barbed wire, and lots of cuts on her neck. One of her ears was almost cut off, and her windpipe was cut. On one hand, most of her fingers were broken, and on the other hand, 3 fingers were nearly cut off. It seemed like she might have tried to protect her face or throat from a knife. She had wounds on her arms and wrists from trying to defend herself. Her whole body was covered in blood and injuries. Her eye socket was broken. Both eyes were black, and both cheekbones were broken. When they found her, her eyes were open, suggesting she saw the killer cut her throat. Later in court, the doctor said that some reports about Anita being mutilated were changed. The doctor clarified that apart from her throat and hands being cut, there was no attack on her stomach or private parts, and her shoulders were not dislocated. After the shocking details were revealed on the morning radio show, fear and anger gripped everyone. People didn't just want justice, they wanted revenge. Capital punishment for the killers became the rallying cry. The whole country was buzzing with discussions, protests, and attempts to get insights from the police. The public was furious. The premier, in response, offered a $50,000 reward for any information leading to Anita's killer's arrest. Soon after, the reward doubled, intensifying the pressure on the detectives. To break the deadlock, the detectives decided to reenact Anita's last night, hoping it would trigger memories for those who were around. Dressed as Anita, an officer retraced her steps, revealing a crucial detail. Anita took an earlier train than initially thought. This led them to pinpoint her location around Newtown Road, prompting a realization that they had received several calls from that area that night. The first call came from a 13-year-old boy and his 14-year-old sister, reporting a woman screaming and being forced into a car. Despite their efforts to intervene, the car drove off. The siblings informed their older brother Paul, who returned home and searched for the woman in the car. Although he found a car matching the description, nothing seemed suspicious, and he moved on. The police followed up on this lead and now had a car description. A few days later, a crucial tip reached the detective handling the case, finally bringing Anita's killer to justice.
All I can say that from volumes of information we obtained from the community since the murder of Mrs. Cobby, last Friday, police raided 3 homes in the Blacktown area.
A person who helps the police shared that they saw 3 guys swipe a car that matched the one taking Anita that night. The main guy they pointed fingers at was John Travers. In Blacktown, people knew 22-year-old John Travers as the leader of a group of guys. The other 2 were Michael Murdoch, an 18-year-old, and Leslie Murphy, who was 22 and also dating Travers' sister. When the police got wind that these guys might be involved in Anita's case, they sent 2 teams to pick them up. One team went to Travers' family home and the other to his uncle's place. Both teams busted in and found Travers and Murdoch snoozing in the same bed at the uncle's place. Leslie was nabbed at Travers' family home. Once all 3 were brought in for questioning, Leslie and Michael copped to stealing the car and got released on bail. But the police kept a close eye on them, using undercover cops. Travers admitted to swiping the car too, but then he said some shocking things about Anita. When the police raided Travers' uncle's place, they found a bloody knife. When they asked Travers about it, he said, "I didn't slit that slut's throat." The police were surprised because they hadn't even mentioned Anita, The police, knowing Travers' past, take samples of his blood, but things get wild when Travers, stuck behind bars, asks his aunt for a smoke, leading to a shocking revelation. Now here's where it gets crazy. The aunt, who's dating Travers's uncle, spills the beans to the police. Even though she knew about Travers's bad history, she had a gut feeling he was involved in Anita's murder. So they come up with a plan. The aunt, with a hidden tape recorder, gives Travers smokes to casually get him to confess. In this intense chat, Travers spills the beans on having relations with Anita and chillingly talks about the horrible details of that night. He even asks the aunt for help in covering his tracks and comes up with an escape plan involving trains and a showdown with the cops. Now, people wonder why the aunt spilled the beans now when she knew about Travers' dark past. Well, her answer's simple. She thought no woman should go through what Anita did. When the aunt hands over the recorded confession to the police, she collapses, feeling the weight of Travers's twisted admission. With this solid proof, the police aim to get another confession from a different guy in the group. The investigation uncovers Anita's final night. Unfortunately, she crossed paths with 5 drunk men led by John Travers. What started as a scary encounter turned into a nightmare. They forced Anita into their stolen car, mercilessly beating her all the way. At a gas station pit stop, Anita's ordeal continued. They reached a desolate field on Reen Road, where the brutality escalated. Travers, deciding Anita posed a threat, gruesomely slit her throat. The harrowing attack lasted 2 more minutes before Anita succumbed. To erase their crimes, the men burned their clothes, leaving a horrifying memory of that tragic night. Anita's tragic tale stirs public outcry for the death penalty during the trial. When the trial started for these guys, a huge crowd gathered outside, eagerly waiting to catch a glimpse of the men. When the guys were being moved to the cars, the crowd swarmed around them and the cops had to inch along. Folks were really pushing for the death penalty, but it was off the table in New South Wales back then. People showed up at the courts all the time, holding signs and even hanging a dummy with a noose around its neck to shout loud and clear about what they were after.
In a case which ignited the fury of the community.
But Anita's parents took a different path, avoiding hate and focusing on keeping women safe. John Cobby, Anita's husband, battles his demons after losing his beloved wife, while the aunt faces threats for her bravery, ending up in witness protection. Fast forward 3 decades, and Gary Murphy faces jailhouse drama, while Michael Murphy loses his battle with cancer. The rest of the gang remains locked up, and Anita's haunting story echoes through the years, a chilling reminder of an unforgettable horror. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.